Hello, welcome again to another of my hip hop discography rankings. It's been a bit of a while, but I'm back, and today I'm going to be looking at the discography of one Ja Rule. Now, Mr. Rule, of course, really best known these days for his feud with 50 Cent, which never seems to end. But at one time was one of the most prominent New York rappers in the latter part of the 90s to the early 2000s. Very big Def Jam artist, one of the biggest selling hip hop artists at his time, and sort of had a bit of a career spiral toward right at the end. I mean, there's still supposed to be another album coming out. Whether that's going to happen, whether Ja Rule is actually just finished or not, but the albums that we do have, we can have a look at. And yeah, we just have a bit of an exploration just about how how his career kind of went during his time as an active performer. So without any further delay, let's get into it. So we have got 7 albums, yes. So at number 7, we go to most recent release, PIL 2, aka Pain is Love 2, released in February 2012, most recent release, and first release not on Def Jam Records. So the idea is for it to be kind of a sequel to his most famous album, Pain is Love. There's not a lot about the album that is that similar to Pain is Love. The intro sort of uses a bit of the Pain is Love intro. Apart from that, there's not too much to do with the album itself. It is a sort of exploration of Ja Rule's career at that point, and it does take a bit of a look at how he actually, about how his stardom has faded. Particularly some of the intro songs, Parachute and Real Life Fantasy, 2 good examples. Real Life Fantasy with Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody sample, looking very specifically about how things have changed for Ja Rule since he was one of the most prominent rap artists, looking at how Murder Inc. has effectively dissolved by that point, how the artists aren't necessarily on speaking terms with each other, talking about how, if you'd have told him in 2003 that this would have happened, he wouldn't have believed it. An interesting choice, since it's pretty much at the start of 2003 that things really did start to go down for him. So I don't know if that's just a rhyming device of just mentioning 2003, or if that's looking at sort of that being the final year or bit of year before things started going awry. But anyway, for an exploration of his sort of demise as it were, it starts off well. Afterwards, it starts getting a bit more kind of generic. Sort of the production provided by Seven O'Reilly, who's Murder Inc.'s one of Murder Inc.'s main producers. Not the strongest of production from him on here. A lot of it is kind of attempts to replicate the sounds that were prevalent at that time, of EDM, of like Alex the Kid-esque stadium rock kind of style. Not to say that any of these are bad necessarily, but they're not great. You know, stuff beats at all. Ja Rule's voice also isn't particularly powerful on any of the songs. I don't know if that's just because it's been such a long time between properly recording albums. So I do have a bit of a cough still. Or just, something about recording or whatever. But ja Rule's performance certainly takes it down quite a bit as well. Yeah, a fine album overall, but not a great album by any means. Which again, it's a shame because as an exploration of the tail end of his career, it starts off quite interesting. But I say we lose a lot of the introspective nature of it as it goes on. It just becomes a bit more of a sort of generic hip hop, not necessarily in the hardcore gangster style that obviously Ja Rule's more known for, which is a bit of a change in pace at least. But still, I think the album overall was a better idea than it was an execution of said idea. So, speaking of which, we look at next, number 6, an album which perhaps wasn't a particularly good idea, but was at least executed well. Blood in My Eye, released in November 2003, right at the height of a lot of his issues with other artists. I mean, there's disses on here, not limited to, but only including 50 Cent, Eminem, Dr. Dre, D12, Obi Trice, DMX. There's other artists who was beefing with at the time, including Daz Dillinger, Common, Jay-Z, say Busta Rhymes. Lots of these people sort of get slight mentions or just subliminals that may or may not be about said people. But yeah, certainly Ja Rule was not a very popular person at the time, so the majority of the album is disses to these artists, and just sort of a way to sort of kind of try and regain his street credibility in general. And yeah, unfortunately, a lot of this just, again, a lot of it sounds good. At least there's sort of some good hardcore production to it. There's some of it is taken from other artists. In particular, the final track, the rap freestyle, was just the beat is taken from Mobb Deep's Burn Learning, which has been proven to be a very successful freestyle track, and Ja Rule does sound very good on it. But yeah, a lot of the disses towards people bring the album down quite a bit. It's also filled with a lot of the Murder Inc. roster, who at the best of times aren't great. Hussein Fatal of the Outlaws turns up on it quite a bit as well. And of course, one of Ja Rule's other major criticisms was how liberally he wore his Tupac influences on his sleeve. So it feels interesting the way of Hussein Fatal, a friend of Tupac's, is on the album. Will you please stop trying to say that he's trying to sound like Tupac? Who doesn't add a lot to it, that is that they're not trying on there already. some of the strongest moments on the album actually are when Ja Rule's not trying to take himself too seriously. So the some of the more comedic disses, um, the use of the two punk ass quarters from the Wash, um, in at the end of one of the tracks is very good, as well as the Bobby Creep skits. Um, Jarl is actually, for all of his faults, is actually quite a funny skits personality. He comes up with some quite amusing skit characters when he's really on it, and this is one of his funniest ones. Just hearing Jarl trying to do his like Robin Leach S character talking about 50 Cent with his bizarre British slash Australian accent. It's something you just can't unhear when you listen to it, and yeah, it is funny. And I say a lot of the best moments on it are when he's trying to be funny. One of the other major highlights, coming just before the Bobby Creek skit, actually, is Race Against Time Part 2. Pretty much the only song where he doesn't talk about the feuds that he's going with at the time, which is also why it's one of the strongest tracks on the album. It's very high octane as well, which isn't on the album at all anywhere else. Particularly, also, a lot of it is sort of the aggressive, hardcore New York style. So having something more upbeat on the album certainly helps it a lot. The main lead single, Clapback, produced by Scott Storch, is a fine Scott Storch beat. Ja kind of wastes a lot of time on the intro, and somewhat on the outro as well, which kind of drags it a bit. The song itself is fine though, so I feel that if it had been cut down a bit for the intro, it would have fared a lot better. But generally speaking, although a lot of the production does sound good, Ja Rule and the Murder Inc. roster don't necessarily have the best lyrics to marry with those beats. So unfortunately, it's kind of it is kind of a bit level with Pain Is Love 2, but again, it just sounds more professionally made. So that's what kind of edges it above Pain Is Love 2. So, number 5 in our list, we look to the debut. Actually, I have this one, Veni Vidi Vici. However, Ja Rule thinks it's supposed to be pronounced. It's obviously from the Italian I came, I saw, I conquered phrase, spelt differently on here, and I don't know if it's meant to be pronounced differently or whatever. I presume it's just written differently to try and make it feel more like Ja Rule's phrase or something like that. But anyway, it's a notably longer album than either of the ones we've looked at so far, which is 20 tracks in total. And I get it, for the debut, you want to try and get out as much material as you can as a way of introducing yourself. Unfortunately, at this point in his career, very early on, Ja Rule didn't have a lot to say. So a lot of the album is fairly repetitive. Again, just lots of very in keeping with the times, hardcore gangster rap. There's bits of it, particularly towards the end section of it, where it gets more introspective. looking at songs like "Daddy's Little Baby" featuring Ron Isley, exploring his relationship with his daughter. The original Race Against Time, which isn't quite, it's more laid back than the sequel on Blood in My Eye, but is still a good song. Only Begotten Son, looking at the relationship between his father, who left when he was very young. So these three songs in a row towards the end of the album really kind of save it in a way. Well, a lot of the other stuff at the beginning kind of just blends into each other. It kind of the only sort of real notable differences are when Jarrell does try different sounds or gets on different people to help him break up the sound of the album. So I mean, on It's Murder featuring DMX and Jay-Z, one of their probably one of their last collaborations together, actually. But looking at the three original Murder Inc. members who came into the game around about the same time, together with the help of Irv Gotti, and all of them sound good on this track still. I say it's the last time they actually work together, so it kind of works as a nice kind of a fitting tribute to them, as it were. E-Dub and Jar with Eric Sermon, which Eric Sermon brings a bit more of a sort of a bouncy kind of beat to the album to change it up a little bit. Similarly as well for the lead single Holla Holla, which has a bit more of a New Orleans bounce kind of style to it, and Jarrell switched up his flow a bit to give him a bit more of his stutter flow, which I've kind of incorporated as I'm trying to speak to you right now, but slightly ill anyway. Holla holla, bottles bottles, models models, dollars dollars, which at least makes it a bit more a memorable sound, which for a lead single helps. For Suicide Freestyle featuring Case, it speeds up his flow considerably as well. The Story to Tell, which has a bit more of a storytelling aspect to his rhymes. Not always with Jarrell is it easy to tell how much of what he's saying is true or not. There's certainly a lot of there's been a lot of criticism, and again another of his criticisms about how much of what he talks about in certain regards to the thug hardcore nature of his work, how much of it is actually true or not. But at least he does sound authentic when he's doing this style of music, even if he can get a bit over the top from time to time. And I say, having too much of it on this album, it does drag it considerably. If it was a shorter album with a lot of the earlier tracks cut out, I say again with the 187 Murder Baptist Church skit, it's at least amusing, so it keeps the album a bit more lively. But for a debut, it introduces you to his style at least, but probably a bit too much to be to make a full album worth it. So next we are going to go, let's change it again, with Pain is Love, the original Pain is Love album, Jarrell's most successful album, released in October 2001. So just 2 years and 4 months after his debut, his third album released under Def Jam, and the most successful album. All pretty much of his major hit singles are in some way on this album. Living It Up with Case, Always on Time with Ashanti, Down Our Bitch with Charlie Baltimore, I'm Real with Jennifer Lopez, which you kind of really need the album to be able to properly appreciate. It's very difficult to have it on the streaming versions of the album. It's seen as more of a Jennifer Lopez song, so it's kind of, you can find it on her albums, but not really on Jar's albums. But yeah, obviously there's a lot of big commercial hits on this album, and that's kind of what does define it in a way. Is a very the peak of Ja Rule's commercial side. And so at least again, this makes it a very upbeat album for a lot of it. The meshing of the kind of thug style and R&B style they has going throughout a lot of the album. Again, another one of his criticisms. They go in too much an R&B pop direction, and he tries singing too much on his songs. If you look at I'm Real with Jennifer Lopez, very bouncy, upbeat song. They certainly have good chemistry together on it. Ja Rule's thug posturing maybe doesn't make quite as much sense on the track, considering it's Jennifer Lopez's song. I get that it was a way to try and stop her career from falling, as it felt it was going down slightly. It helps revitalise her a little bit, and helps bring her to a more hardcore audience. But I say sometimes, Ja, it's a great song. I do love the song, but sometimes some of Ja Rule's, over the top gangster lyrics do kind of take it down a notch. Similarly for Always on Time, which at least with it being Ja's song and Ashanti featuring on it, makes a bit more sense for him to to lean in that kind of style. But as I say, sometimes some of the lyrics are a bit too much to take properly, but it works more on this song perhaps than Unreal. Down Our Bitch with Charlie Baltimore marries the styles a bit more better. The content of the song being more of a loyalty based relationship between the man and the woman, sort of the thug and the down ass bitch. It at least works more for the style of the track. It's more of a smoother song as well, which kind of helps it. The Ja Rule is smoother on the track generally. It's still a bit shouty at times, but it's smoother than he has been on some of his other tracks. Charlie Baltimore sounds good with him. She gets an entire verse at least, so there's a bit more of a partnership between them, which helps work. And it's a very catchy chorus. Ja Rule has some great choruses throughout this album. Again, just like at the peak of his commercial style. So a lot of the choruses and beats on here are very, very kind on the ear. Living It Up, of course, probably the strongest song on here. It's a great club banger. Obviously, the beat is pretty much taken from Stevie Wonder, Do I Do, as is a lot of the chorus. But it works. It's really catchy. Case sounds really good on there with Ja Rule. Ja Rule's not too over the top, I feel, in his lyrics. And it's also one of his... the original version isn't a clean song, but the version that's on the album now is a clean. All the lyrics have been cleansed, as it were. So it's a clean song at least. So easy to play for your parents. Throughout the rest of the album, we get the nice eerie sounding "Darling for Murder" intro. Ja Rule, manages to bring some great urgency to the sounds of his vocals on here. A great time for him to use it to really bring you in for the intro before you get into the more commercial sounding songs later on. Later on the album, get Lost Little Girl, a more spacey, Neptune-esque kind of sound, looking at young strippers in a stripping game. The messaging of it is perhaps a little bit misogynistic, but it's early 2000s hip hop. I mean, at least he's kind of got his heart in the right place somewhat for the majority of it. We follow this with So Much Pain, which features Tupac. It's a remake of the song Pain with Tupac and Stretch, down to the verses, Ja Rule's verses basically being rewrites of the exact same verses. I mean, they keep Tupac's final verse for the end of it, but Ja's verses before then are basically remakes of the other verses on the original version of the song. I don't know if I feel that if they realised just how much the Tupac comparisons were going to bite him later on, they probably would have given this song a skip. If you know the original song, this doesn't really do it any favours at all. I suppose maybe if you're not that familiar with the original version, you're not that familiar with some of Tupac's less known songs, maybe this is a good introduction, but this song just it doesn't really work. And I say, for the whole Tupac comparison things, I just don't think it helps at all. I don't think it should have made it for the album. But we then follow that with the stronger outro, Pain Is Love, the title song. Which, kind of, at least sounds a bit more more of Ja Rule's authentic style than trying to imitate Tupac in the previous song. Throughout that, we kind of get a lot more of the the Murder Inc. Style songs, which have a bit more of a West Coast feel for a lot of it feels, as well as some collaborations with the likes of Tweet and Missy Elliott, or some of the more sexual drug influence tracks, X, Smoking and Riding before that as well. So yeah, it's a bit up and down for a lot of it. We have the very entertaining Leo skits. Again, there's the characters that Ja Rule's able to bring to his albums, and the vocals for them, just you can't really help. I say some of them are stronger than others. Some of them don't work that well, but at least he's trying to be entertaining. But yeah, I say a lot of the Murder Inc. Collaborative stuff just doesn't really work too well. I say the Murder Inc. roster isn't that great at the best of times, certainly on the rap side of things. So yeah, the more commercial songs actually work a lot better than the hardcore tracks, which unfortunately for a lot of maybe the Ja Rule diehards, Ja Rule did actually work better as a pop R&B artist in a lot of senses. it's nice when he can bring a more hardcore flair to his tracks, but when there's a lot of it scattered throughout his discography, it kind of makes all of it feel a little bit too much after a while. So this is kind of like the middle of the road, as it were. I feel in terms of his career, where again, the commercial side was really kind of like outweighing the more hardcore style. So number three, yes, we're already at number three, aren't we? We are going to go November 2004, RULE, the final studio album released under Def Jam. This is pretty much the end of Murder Inc. as a label. It was the Inc. at this point. Certainly kind of like the end of Ja Rule's career in a way as well. I mean, just look at how the hip hop landscape was changing at the time. A lot more alternative styles in terms of like your Kanye West, your Outkast were getting more prominent at this time. The hardcore artists, as they were at this time, the more mainstream ones were kind of changing their style a bit more as well to be kind of less aggressive. Your Snoops and Jay Z's were kind of taking, even Eminem were taking more of a toned down approach. I mean, 50's Get Rich or Die Trying, which had been released the year before, it kind of did for gangster rap what Pirates of the Caribbean the same year did for pirate films. It kind of revitalized the genre and brought it to a new commercial prominence, but then kind of made a ceiling that nobody could touch again. So everything else just kind of fell flat after that in a way, or nobody could try and make anything like that in a way. Certainly people tried at that kind of time, but yeah, gangster rap had, in that form, in the commercialized form, had kind of worn out its welcome by this point, and certainly with the Inc. having in federal investigations from 2003. I think there was a notable want to tone down a lot of the hardcore gangster nature of Ja Rule's material, which in a way kind of helps the album quite a bit. Again, with it being like the final, I mean, it wasn't known at the time it was going to be his final mainstream album, but it does certainly, in a way, feel like a bit of a curtain call. I mean, right from the beginning with Last and Mohicans featuring Black Child, we get a kind of a Last of a Dying Breed sense from Ja Rule's lyrics, and it's probably a bit more prophetic than he realised, because, yeah, I say, just with the landscape of mainstream gangster rap and for Ja Rule and Murder Inc. as a whole, this was kind of the last shot at it, really. So a lot of the rest of the album is a bit more of the mainstream Ja Rule, the more party orientated Ja Rule. Some songs such as the lead single "Wonderful" with Ashanti and R. Kelly, taking a bit more of a sort of look at his success and how people treat him because of his success, particularly women, by the sounds of the lyrics. But again, early 2000s hip hop. But yeah, that works. It has a nice lavish sound to it at least. R. Kelly does help a lot with the vocals and his verse. The other sort of the only kind of apart from the later sort of very specific hardcore songs, the memory titled "Gun Talk" and "About My Business." We also have the street anthem "New York," very early on in the album with Fat Joe and Jadakiss, which of course helped play into the 50 Cent feud and sort of bring them into it for a little bit. Jadakiss has got a really great verse, as the strongest lyricist of the three of them. Fat Joe does well as well, and Ja Rule, both have fine verses. They sound, aggressive, and they follow the kind of style at least. Fat Joe has kind of one of the most like kind of like kind of unintentionally hilarious lines. It was the bit halfway through the verse of like, people saying I must have found Pun's rhyme book to describe his own lines, and now if you listen to enough Fat Joe and enough Big Pun, you realise that the comparison isn't quite there, but it's a braggiotous line, so fine. There is a bit of a sense of Ja Rule having run out of material for this album. There are 2 songs where the chorus involves him spelling his name, which has one of the easiest names in hip hop to spell, but they're there anyway in the forms of What's My Name and RULE. The title track, which at least in RULE's terms is a very, again, it looks at kind of the effects that the federal investigations had on him and Murder Inc., and at least is quite a high-paced song, so brings that energy up to it. More in terms of like so clubby female relationship songs scattered throughout the album as well. One of the highlights after the stripping game skit actually isn't Ja Rule's skit. It's Bernie Mac from the Players Club, which is a funny sounding skit. I mean, Bernie Mac's vocal inflections are enough to sort of, and the way he portrays his character in this sketch, is enough to it's very amusing. Weird that Ja Rule didn't decide to make, because he only makes his own skits a lot of the time. It's weird they decided to keep this for it, but it's a good skit anyway. Followed by The Manual, which is very, I mean, the lyrics are so kind of like cliche of separating your housewife from a hoe, money over bitches. Ja Rule's vocals on the chorus as well, kind of almost border on self-parody. They're quite over the top. But I mean, that's kind of why you have to love it, really, is that it is just such an over the top and kind of melodramatic, not melodramatic so much, but some, that much pomp and cliche with it. It's kind of like a lot of times Ja Rule's at his best when he's not being taken too seriously, and I think that kind of works really well in this track's favour. Can you stop freezing, please? Thank you. Right. Okay, I'll try and get to the end, I promise. So we have some more introspective songs towards the end of it, though, which helps the album out quite a bit. With Life Goes On, with Trick Daddy and Chink Santana, talking about fallen friends. Where I'm From, Ja Rule's most honest look at gun violence and hood violence. And then closing with Passion. Again, just feels again like kind of a career ender, sort of just with an extended outro, sort of thanking all the people that he's been involved with, and giving a big shout outs to different crews and people and everything. It does really feel like sort of like a closer to his career, and in a way it kind of should have been. Yeah, I appreciate some of the the look, the introspective looks of PIL 2, but yeah, this is kind of quite a complete sort of closer of an album, I feel. So that's why it ranks so high, despite being so late in his career, I feel. So number two. The two one's quite tricky actually. Doing these rankings, looking just trying to look at Ja Rule's career overall and just think about which albums work best for me. But I decided for number two, Last Temptation. So 2002, sort of in between Blood in My Eye and Pain Is Love. So it's kind of between the really street hardcore album and the really mainstream commercial album. There's still quite a commercial nature for this album. It's kind of around the time when people were really starting to take notice of just of Ja Rule's faults as an artist, as a performer, and yeah. But for me, I kind of feel that a lot of this album is Ja Rule at his strongest in terms of making commercial songs. There's a lot of hits on there, starting from Thug Lovin' with Bobby Brown. Again, the chorus uses a Stevie Wonder sample, but it's it still sounds, the beats nice and slinky, and Bobby Brown does sound good on there. Following up with Mesmerize with Ashanti, which for their collaborations together, this is kind of one of, in terms of like the in terms of like screen time, they pretty much have equal billing on this track. They share the same amount of the song pretty much. So in terms of those that collaboration, it's kind of one of the strongest from that perspective of giving both of them enough time to shine on the album, on the song. We get a track produced by Pharrell on there, so at least we get a different producer on the album. Again, a very sort of bouncy, even more of the kind of hardcore Neptune style, but still quite a bouncy track, and with some subliminals to 50 Cent and DMX to kind of help start bringing in that period of the career. Followed by the Pledge remix featuring Nas and Ashanti. Tupac is also on there, but this time it's just outro vocals. They don't just repurpose an entire verse. Nas really helps bring the track up, with the album up as well. I mean, this is kind of why the album feels so strong. I think is because there's a stronger verbal collaborations on here. Nas is on this album. Later on with Connected, a sort of a collaboration between Ja Rule and Death Row, or The Row at the time, features Crooked I, who even then was a very good rapper. Eastwood is also quite good on the track as well. I mean, they both pretty much overshadow Ja Rule, but it helps bring the album up. Earlier, before then, we have more of the funky sounding Last Temptation title track between Ja Rule and Charlie Baltimore. Again, pretty much sharing their time on the track. We follow this with Murder Me, which takes a tiny sample, and just a very smooth sort of sex track. With Cadillac Tar isn't that annoying on his verse. I just feel like each version of Ja Rule is kind of on here and is kind of at its strongest in a lot of ways. I mean, some of the later tracks are perhaps not quite as strong as the older ones on the album, but generally speaking, Murder Reigns with the Toto Africa sample, kind of like when the video kind of looks at the kind of explores the FBI investigation. You forget that this song was actually released before the investigation, but it kind of does have a nice bit of a introspective look at Ja Rule before he was getting too introspective on later albums. We have America, which is a bit of a political song, not quite as much to kind of warrants its working that strong, but yeah, it's fine for what it is. And I say it's at that point of the album it kind of starts going down a little bit anyway, but at least it's only kind of those last few songs. It's also quite a short album in comparison to some of the other ones, so this kind of helps it as well. But I feel that it's not. It was a bit of a toss up between these two, but for number one, I'm gonna go Rule 336. So second album to release on Def Jam in October 2000, and it's bringing in the commercial side with songs like Between Me and You, Put It On Me, I Cry, a bit more of a, even though it's a smoother song as well. A lot of these tracks I feel it's kind of, there's more of a particularly towards the early side of the album, we get a bit more of a mixture of sounds, at least, even though a lot of the hardcore tracks are on here. We get a bit more of a mixture of sounds. We get a bit of more of an Asian influence on Me and You with Christina Milian, and on the song Love Me or Hate Me. We get a West Coast feel for It's Your Life with Shade Shice. Say a smooth soul sample for I Cry with Lil Mo. One of Us towards the end, which has a look at looking at God and sort of like if him and Ja Rule switch places, and how would God react to being in the ghetto and having to deal with drugs and deal with gun violence and this kind of stuff. So, very interesting look at that subject. Earlier on the album, we get more of the sort of the like paranoid but defiant sound of Ja Rule with 6 Feet Underground and Love Me or Hate Me, looking at his all the perceived enemies from the success that he's gaining, and just looking at how he's still going to be successful despite all the people hating on him. Love Me or Hate Me mentions comparing himself to dead celebrities. Tupac and Biggie, of course, are mentioned, but also River Phoenix to show that he has heard of other celebrities, dead celebrities. We then get the very sort of, for lack of a better term, furious song "Fuck You" with O1 and Vita, which of course was placed on the Fast and Furious soundtrack, which Ja Rule appeared in. I'm not sure if this was created with the intention of being part of the soundtrack. I mean, I imagine it was recorded before he was involved in the film, but it certainly does sound, very high octane and thumping, so it really matches with that style of film. It's a great a film song. and I mean, Ja Rule just does sound really, really. It brings the right level of aggression to this track. So does O1 for his third verse. For a murdering guest rapper, he sounds really good on this track. He again brings the right sort of level of aggression to his verse. Manages to ride the track very well, particularly the sort of like mid-section of his verse. He manages to bounce up and down quite a bit on it, which works very well. And, the beat itself, it's really, it's just so banging and bouncing in places. It's really one of Jaro's strongest, considering it's just what it did become for a film soundtrack and didn't really get that popular. I think it's one of his strongest tracks. I say we have Put It On Me with Vita actually doing a verse, not just doing the chorus this time. And again, she sounds good on this track. Actually, a clean song as well, and not just like a written into a clean version like Living It Up was. This is actually, as far as I can tell, a clean song. So again, good one for the family. Some weird bits after Fuck You, where we have literally two skits back to back, one of them being a sex skit, one of them being a drug skit, to try and mark the album into a bit more of a sex and drugs part of the album, even though it doesn't make that much of an change to it, because then quite soon we do get I Cry, looking at his relationships with his wife, with fallen friend, with his mother. It's nice to just hear Ja Rule sounding smoother than usual. And Lil Mo, who was supposed to be a big Murder Inc. artist, sounds really good on the chorus. I think overall, just like that first section of the album, Ja Rule sounds really, really strong over it, and the songs themselves are, very catchy, very hard hitting, in the right places. So I think that's kind of what edges this album over the others for me. And it's it was the first number one album in the US they had as well, so it's kind of like the transitional point as well between the early hardcore stuff and the more mainstream stuff from later. So that's I think Ja Rule. But that's the discography overall, and in that way, I think we can see just how I feel that Ja Rule works best in terms of what he's released over his career, and hope so. I was obviously been a little bit ill for this one, but I'll try and be a bit better vocally for the next one. That is Ja Rule for me. I'll see you at some point soon for more. I'm going to try and get a few more of these done. I've got a bit more time to look over things and do some more videos. So I'll see you soon.